started taking evening walks around campus in my final year of college. It wasn't long before I began noticing that it helped me keep my weight down and clear my head after a long day of work. After graduation, I kept up the practice and continued doing it to this day. While many of those around me had become diabetic and hypertensive, causing them to become dependent on multiple medications, I have none of those problems. In fact, my blood pressure is consistently well within the normal range, just as my weight and blood sugar are, and at present, I'm the only member of my family able to make such a claim, actually. As I approach my 43rd birthday, I see no reason to ever stop those post-dinner walks. For anyone reading this interested in getting healthier, I recommend walking over jogging every time. You get all the benefits without the wear and tear on your body that you often get from running. Knee problems come to mind specifically. Anyways, like everything in life, there will always be a few downsides to any activity though. Most of those will come from the outside world and those things that you just can't control. The story I'm telling today involves one such downside. The setting was a nice, cool summer evening. I had just completed a wonderful dinner with my family and set out for my usual 4-mile trek around my neighborhood. I'd made this walk 1,000 times and never encountered anything worse than a dog who'd escaped from its owner. In those cases, it only took a shoo or a wave with my walking stick to drive them away. These walks, being one of the rare times in my life I got to myself, I'd use it to plan out my future or just enjoy the beautiful music of nature going on all around me. For this reason, I generally walked alone. Although I never stopped anyone from coming along, I think my family realized that I preferred the solitude. On this night, the sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon. I was coming up to the midway point where I turned for home. My street comes to a dead end exactly 2 miles from my house. At that dead end, there's a big oak tree that I walk around. I have no particular reason to do it just became a habit after a while. Anyway, I just made my turn and was heading back when a man's voice boomed out from behind me. "Good evening, neighbor." I almost jumped out of my skin when I heard it. I looked over my shoulder and saw a man jogging up to me. I was so annoyed that I actually barked a curse at him. He seemed to come out of nowhere. There was a bunch of trees off to the left, but I didn't see or hear anyone over there when I passed by. Something about it just didn't seem right, though. It was getting dark, but from what I could tell, I'd never seen the man before, and I had no interest in making friends at that moment, especially this guy. His popping up from behind me had me in a bad mood. I'm not usually a rude person, but something about him bothered me, and it went beyond his sneaky arrival. I attempted to just lose him, but he actually eventually caught up. Now I was sure that I didn't know him. "It's unseasonably cold for this time of the year, isn't it?" His attempt at small talk kind of grated on me, and I could feel the scowl on my face. All I wanted at that moment was just to get home. I fought the urge to tell him to just buzz off. I didn't want to be rude. Despite being clueless, he'd done nothing wrong, really. We walked another mile or so together before my house showed up, and this entire time he'd continued rambling on about nothing important, and I didn't really say anything back. The relief that I felt seeing my house in the distance was quickly replaced by this sense of dread. I wasn't sure if I wanted this annoying man to know where I lived. Instead of turning onto my street, I just kept walking. I had no plan of how I was going to shake the guy, but I figured that I'd come up with it as I walked. We carried on for about 20 yards or so before he said something that just made my blood run cold. "Hey, Nick, isn't that your street we just passed?" This sort of sick feeling washed over me, and I actually felt like I broke out into a cold sweat. I took another step and everything just kind of went silent. An indescribable rage boiled inside of me. I could hear my heart pounding inside my head. And finally, I blew up on the man in a way I'd never had before on anyone. I screamed at him, "Who in the hell are you? I'd never met you before in my life, and how do you know my name?" "I know I didn't tell it to you," I said. A smug smile seemed to kind of spread across his face, and it was just beyond spine-chilling in that moment. "Well, it looks like you got me." He was already this rather imposing gentleman, but That smile made him just monstrous in my eyes. An air of menace poured off of him like cheap cologne, and I grew more nervous the longer I stood there, but despite the terror that I felt, my ego prodded me to just assert myself there. To some onlooker, it might have been like seeing a sardine trying to intimidate a great white. I don't know who in the hell you think you are or why you decided to bother me, but I can promise you that if you ever bother me again, I'll shove my foot so far up your you-know-what. You'll need a surgeon to remove it. I actually said that. It was laughable, and it was an empty threat. I'm an average-sized man, but he could have bent me into a pretzel if he really wanted to. By this point, I was so scared and angry that I was shaking uncontrollably. I'm sure that he could see it, and it probably went a long way assuring him that he had the upper hand. Even after all of my sort of threats and yelling, that weird grin that he had never seemed to fade. There was another long, uncomfortable silence. I was almost relieved when that guy finally spoke. "Have a nice night, Nick." I was at a loss at how to react, so I just turned and began walking toward home. Every few yards or so, I'd look over my shoulder to ensure that he wasn't following. Each time, I half expected him to pop up right behind me and strangle me to death with his massive hands. I kept this up until I got inside my house. And now that I was, quote-unquote safe, the fear overwhelmed me so much that I had to run to the bathroom, and I legitimately vomited. I'd never done that before, but once I heaved up my entire dinner, I rinsed out my mouth and washed my face in the sink. And I kind of stared at myself in the reflection, wondering why I'd reacted so negatively to that guy. Never in my life have I ever had an experience like this, nor can I fully explain what had happened. All I know is that every cell in my body told me to just get away. His very presence just felt wrong for some unexplainable reason, and this made me hate him. Had he not acted so strange when I confronted him, I may still be questioning my behavior. Now I know I'm not explaining it very well, and most of you probably reading this probably think I'm crazy, but I can only describe how I felt at that moment. I briefly thought about calling the police, but I had no idea what I would even say if I did. Making small talk with a neighbor is hardly a crime, and if anyone acted suspiciously, it was me. Threatening to assault a stranger didn't sound like a sane reaction to the situation. I chose to keep my mouth shut and say nothing, and that includes to my wife. There was no way she'd even understand, and I don't really blame her. After that incident, I began carrying my handgun with me in the evenings and changed the route that I took. Fortunately, I would never have another experience like that again, but I would see that man one more time. It had been 5 or 6 months since he and I had spoken. I was doing a good job putting the incident behind me. One afternoon, my wife and I were unloading groceries from the car, and a silver 4-door sedan slowly drove by. The driver waved at us, and being the friendly neighbor that I usually am, I waved back. I barely lowered my hand when I realized that the driver was that same stranger. All those awful feelings came flooding back. That horrible smile burned into my mind, and I'm not sure how long I was really standing there, and my wife's voice pulled me back to earth. She asked if I was okay and said that I was white as a sheet. Rather than dredge up the whole story and risk looking like some insane person, I told her that I was probably just dehydrated. She accepted the excuse, and we went back to unloading the car. 5 years have gone by, and I haven't seen this guy since. Even though I've had all this time to think about it, I still have no idea why he and I crossed paths that day. He obviously sought me out, but that's all I can be certain of. I've had some minor disagreements with a few neighbors, but nothing that I could think justified hiring someone to intimidate or even stalk me. He never gave me a message or threatened me like you'd think a person like that would. Unless he shows up again or someone brings it up, I can only conclude that he chose me at random to just bully. And now that I've finally told people about what happened, I intend to make this the last time that I talk about it. Hopefully, sharing it here will allow me to let it go once and for all, and it can be forgotten about forever. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.